2024. And for April 2024, this represents the first month now of the second quarter of the year. And at the conclusion of today's presentation, you'll have an opportunity to participate in our question and answer session. So today what I'd like to do is I want to talk about key economic indicators, the global economy, the domestic economy, mergers and acquisitions, and other significant news, and then what's ahead in the rest of 2024. So today we're going to talk about the semiconductor outlook for 2024, 5 factors that are shaping the industry, and then the implications of AI in transforming the industry. And I've got a guest speaker, a friend of mine from Silicon Valley, which will be Dave Coakley, and Dave will chime in in our Q&A on the semiconductor business and what he sees taking place in the Bay as well as every place else. So what I'd like to talk about first of all is the chip industry is bouncing back in 2024, which is good news, with the assistance of generative AI. And of course, there are complications because of geopolitics around the world. Now, the infamously cyclical semiconductor industry had a challenging year in 2023. The market for the 7th time took a hit since 1990, and sales were projected to go down about 9.4%, somewhere around $520 billion. And for the year. Now, looking at 2024, it's a much more upbeat. The projections are that the global sales will be somewhere around $588 billion, and that's an increase of about 13% and 2.5% higher than 2022. You may recall that that was a record year for growth in the semiconductor business. In terms of markets, well, both PCs and smartphone sales are really expected to grow about 4%, much higher than we saw. If you look at last year, those sales were down almost 14%. Now, we take a look at the cyber implications, which is a big impact to all companies in the technology industry. So the semiconductor industry, compared to other industries, is facing a lot of issues at this point. So due to the increasing importance of semiconductors for multiple industries, it's often targeted by state-backed actors. And as a result, geopolitical issues and restrictions on advanced chip making, technology, IP, and of semiconductors, etc., is one of the world's most significant problems and targets that we're going to see taking place this year. So that's something to keep on the watch. And of course, in 2024, by the way, companies should consider accelerating their efforts to bolster cybersecurity due to the fact that the infrastructures are being attacked all over the country, and this has an impact on the supply chains. Now, I mentioned the 5 factors to shape the industry. First of all, the automotive industry is in the midst of a seismic shift with a sharp pivot towards electric vehicles, autonomous driving, and connected vehicles. These advancements really heavily rely on sophisticated semiconductor technology, driving an unprecedented demand now for specialized chips. When you look at the world governments acknowledging the importance of semiconductor manufacturing, the awareness has really spurred various initiatives to strengthen local capabilities and ensure supply chain security. Again, that's another concern, is supply chain capability. The geopolitical tensions, particularly the ongoing trade disputes between the United States and China and sanctions, have really ripple effect on the industry. And disruptions in global supply chain is due to trade restrictions have really amplified over the last several months. And then, of course, we look at the AI implications, which is affecting all industries and all sectors, and we're going to talk about that throughout the year. The era of artificial intelligence is upon us, really permeating various sectors and driving monumental innovation. And the rapid development and integration of AI technology really necessitates, advanced spanning of the data centers, especially the edge devices and consumer electronics, and demanding high performance and energy efficient chips to accommodate all workloads. We're seeing more of that happening. Here's the critical aspect, and that is the talent shortage and the workforce dynamics. And that is a significant challenge facing the industry today. It's an acute shortage of people with skills. And what we're seeing is, in some cases, people are coming in from various countries, such as Taiwan, to help get some of the new semiconductor plants that are opening now off and up and running. We're going to have to train a lot of people in this country to be able to work in the semiconductor industry. So you're talking about AI, machine learning, and internet things of things. It's really created a gap, and that's a gap that needs to be filled. Factors such as the automotive sector, strategic government interventions, and geopolitical tensions on AI integration, all of these are having a profound effect on the shaping of the industry in and of itself. Now, the key here is the transformation of the industry with AI impacts. So, in recent years, the semiconductor industry has really witnessed a significant transformation, primarily due to integrated artificial intelligence into various semiconductor designs, productions, and testing aspects. So, chip designers are currently facing various challenges that really demand a thorough aspect of investigation and resolution. So, the systems and integration that are right now, we're really leveraging a lot of intellectual property. And AI will take the designs, et cetera, and move forward. Now, they're trying to streamline the time to market, but the biggest effort right now is trying to curtail expenses because the manufacturing process is very expensive, and we're looking now to improve that. And when you look at the challenges that lie ahead, we're talking about AI models rely on vast, high quality data sets for effective learning. We're looking at developing robust, what you would call AI algorithms that would really handle diverse and complex decisions and designs scenarios, just as in the area of significant challenge. And of course, AI models often operate as black boxes, really posting challenges and interpreting and explaining decision-making process. And finally, you have tool integration, and that is the methodologies into existing electronic design automation tools in terms of it's going to be challenging going forward. So that kind of takes you through the aspect of what's happening briefly in the semiconductor business, and we're going to talk more about that later in the program with our special guest. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to take a look at the key economic indicators. I'd like to talk about the gross domestic product, inflation, unemployment at both the federal and the state level, and of course, the price per barrel of oil. So looking at the global GDP, the projection around the globe is around 2.9% this year. And then looking at 2025, a little bit of a slowdown to 2.5%. When we look at the U.S. economy for 2024, we're looking at a growth rate of 2.6% by the end of the year, and then dropping down to 2% in 2025. Keep in mind, the projections are a slowing economy in the United States. If you look at inflation, we're looking at CPI running around 3.1%. Right now, we're over 3.5% for the year, and then looking at then dropping down to 2.4% next year. And I'm going to talk more about that in the presentation. The unemployment rate nationally is projected to go at about 3.9% this year, and then just drop down a little bit to 3.8. California, as you know, usually is the last to go into recession and the first and the last to come out. But the unemployment picture is projected to go out this year around 5.1%, and then dropping down to 3.9 next year. Now, when we look at the price per oil on the range, early in the year we had it down around somewhere around $70 to $100 a barrel, and people were saying, how could you go up to 80? Well, I'll tell you more about that when we get into the program, but oil is inching up on a daily basis. On a global basis right now, the good news for the Chinese economy, manufacturing activity has expanded in March for the first time since last September, and a further sign that the world's second largest economy is now stabilizing. And the official manufacturing purchasing managers index rose to 50.8 from the 49 that we had in February. Now, this signals something very positive. It means that we may be moving away from a contracting market and moving into a growth position. And that is based upon the target level is 50 basis points. And when you're over that, you're moving in the right direction. So that's good signs for that, for the global economy. And I'll talk more about that later. The Bank of Canada is basically indicated they're going to continue to hold rates and not make any changes at this point, and they're still struggling with inflation. And when we look at the European Central Bank, they also are holding rates again for the time being because of concerns about existing inflation. Now, when we look at the domestic economy, very interesting here. So we had strong job growth in March. And that's really diminishing the urgency on the part of the federal government to reduce interest rates and cut rates at this point. I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Now, Powell signaled a rate delay. And what he's talking about here is that based on inflation continues to be over 3%, 3.5 this month, the necessity to cut interest rates in June will probably not happen. We're looking further out in the year, maybe as early as September. It could even go till December. But again, that's all predicated if we can get inflation under control. As you know, the Federal Open Market Committee, the FOMC, met recently, and again, the cut of 25 basis points targeted for September is essentially off the table. And it'll, excuse me, for June, and that'll take place more likely, if we can, sometime in September. Now let's take a look at inflation. So the Consumer Price Index rose to 3.5% in March, again going in the wrong direction. And on an annual basis, that says there's some real concerns here. If you recall, in February, it was up by 3.2%. Now, some of the bright spots are that food is slightly going down a little bit, but household buying is continuing to surge. People are still spending money on credit cards, cash, etc., and buying a lot of goods. But the real key is focusing on the employment picture. That's driving a lot of it as well. Unfortunately, the wholesale sales index went up 2.1% over the last 12 months, and it went up 1.6% in February, which is higher. And that's the products that are being shipped to the retailers, the stores, etc., and therefore they're going to pass that along to you and I. In the area of the trade exports, we had good news. We were up by 263 billion, and that's about a $6 billion increase in more than January, in the month of February. So this is good news. Keep in mind, a lot of these data we're talking about today trails. So that's a good sign with exports. In the area of the trade deficit, it widened again over February. It widened by 1.9%. So the deficit is just under $70 billion. If you recall, and not too long ago, we were running over 90 billion. So the key is to drive that number down as much as possible. Retail sales had a very good month. It rose 0.7 of a point. And again, it's based on robust consumer buying. The buying habits are still out there in spite of everything else. It's continuing to grow over February. Now let's take a look at the employment picture. So employment during the month of March added about 303,000 jobs, and unemployment decreased 0.1 of a point. So it's down to 3.8 nationally. If you look at the categories here, the one I want to focus on is construction. You remember last month, we had a negative figure. Again, a lot of that was tied to weather. So the good news is, as we start moving into the spring and the summertime, more construction jobs are getting off the ground and moving forward, which is important. Health and education continues to be strong with 88,000. Manufacturing was basically flat for the month. So if you kind of look at the categories there, again, you look at government, and you know my thoughts on that, but that gives you the highlights of what transpired across the country. Now, taking a look at California's employment picture, payrolls grew by a modest 28,000 in March, and unemployment remains the same at 5.3%. And that's higher than the projected number of 5.1 that they're looking at going out the end of the year. The key here was construction was up by 4,600. Unfortunately, we saw a loss of 5,300 jobs in the manufacturing sector. Again, health and education were still strong as well. And some of the other areas, such as retail, was up a little bit. Wholesale and transportation were down. Now we take a look at the mortgage rates. So what's interesting here is for first-time buyers, the interest rate closed late last week at 7.41%. There are those that are projecting it's going to go up to 8% before the summertime. We'll see how that goes. Again, that's significantly higher. And that's putting a lot of first-time buyers on the sidelines. But I'll get into some of the other areas later about the housing market, which is coming back strong. In terms of manufacturing, just like with China, our index closed up 2.5 points last month to 50.3%. The good news is we're starting to move away from contraction and moving to growth, again, over the 50 basis points. So this is very good for us. Looking at factory orders, Basically, orders rebounded by 1.4% in February after two straight monthly declines. So that's good news in that area. So that's picking up substantially. In the area of small business confidence, it's now the lowest level in 11 years. Small businesses are very concerned about inflation and all types of activity, supply chain, etc. The index fell down to 88.5. The highest level we had in 50-year average is 98. So we're substantially lower than that. And we're not sure when that's going to start to turn, but that's based upon the confidence level of small businesses throughout the United States. When we look at consumer confidence in March, basically the current situation grew slightly more than pessimistic about the outlook. So it went up to 104.7, up from the 104.6 that we had the prior month. So there's some positives in that particular area on that side. Now, crude oil prices, which is interesting. In January, we talked about it somewhere around $70 a barrel. Well, late last week and as of yesterday, the West Texas Intermediate closed at $86.57, and that's 18% plus increase since January. I want you to think about that. It's up 18% since January for the first quarter of the year. Now, the housing market starts. There was a pullback here, and we saw a decline of about 14.7% in the month of March. And that's a reversal from what we saw in the month of February. So that the starts basically were down almost 15%. When you look at new home sales, the good news is they were up by 8.8%, and that's the strongest we've seen since last September. And new homes should continue to gradually improve as the economic conditions move in a different direction. As we start getting into the spring and the summertime, families tend to want to relocate, buy things for the first time, or either trade out. So we should see a good market in new home sales as we go through the rest of the year. Now let's take a look at Southern California. In Los Angeles, the midpoint of a home was $805,000 for those that were on the market. That was a slight decrease of 1.5%. But sales were up by almost 21% from February, but down 10% from 2023 for the same time frame. When we look at Orange County, which is extremely strong, the midpoint for selling of a home was $1.4 million. And that was up 3.7% from the prior month. And we saw sales were up by 23% in March. And in February, it was down for 3.8% from March of 2023. Looking at San Diego, this is a surprise. The houses that are on the market are now priced at an average of $1,020,000, and that's up 4% in March. And then sales were up by almost 16% from February, but down about 7% from the prior year. And again, this is tied to new mortgage loan applications and also the mortgage rate and to people being able to qualify for homes. So we are moving in the right direction, but there's still a lot of small inventories across the country. When we talk about existing home loans, existing home mortgages, they fell by 4.3% in March. And that was widely expected because of, again, the slip in mortgage applications during the month and also the fact that qualifications for loans and more concerns and conditions being tied to a lot of the new loans portfolios as we see it. In the area of construction spending, I was down about 0.3 of a point in January. And again, a lot of that was towards what we saw in terms of weather implications throughout the country. When we look at productivity, again, the information will not probably be out until maybe May or June regarding the first quarter of this year. Now, company displacements has always been a major target. We look at companies that have had substantial displacements or layoffs. Well, Dell Computer eliminated 6,000 jobs last month. Ford Motor Company, another 700. General Electric, 1,000. McKinsey, which is a major consulting firm, 360, as sales for a lot of consulting services has declined in general across the board. It's affecting the accounting firms, etc. And then, as you know, Tesla announced about a week and a half ago, the elimination of 14,000 jobs, primarily in the state of Texas. And then Nike eliminated 740 jobs at their corporate offices. The M&A space continues to be robust in spite of the fact that the interest rates are higher. What's interesting is you're seeing more consolidation in the biotech space, and I'm going to go through these companies specifically to give you that. So Home Depot is back on the acquisition track. They're buying a company called SRS, and it's a huge services company for $18.25 billion. The idea is to continue to expand their business portfolio as they compete with Lowe's and everybody else in the marketplace. Johnson & Johnson is buying Shockwave Medical for basically $13 billion, and that's basically to improve things in combating heart disease. And we look at a company called GenLab. It's broadened its strength, if you will, in the oncology marketplace by buying a company called Profound Bio for $1.8 billion. And this will basically increase their place in the market when they look at the pipeline for cancer treatments. Vertex is buying Almune Immune Sciences for $4.9 billion. Alpine basically develops a lot of immune therapies to address cancer, kidney disease, and other serious immune and inflammatory conditions by engineering proteins that really influence the body's immune system. So this is a good move on their part. And of course, for those of you who've heard of TGI Fridays, they've just been acquired by a company called Hostmore, which is out of England, and for $220 million. They've struggled over the last few years. The idea is this company back east, outside the country, will now have 600 restaurants in 44 countries, and their intent is to take it public one day on a different stock exchange. So there's a lot of significant activities taking place around the country. First of all, the shock waves went out around the country on April 1, where California is slashing workers as there's a $20 an hour arrives for people in the food industry. So if you talk to some of the people working in food services, like waiters and waitresses, if you will, in some cases, they're making the same because they've cut their hours. In some cases, restaurants have cut their hours and they've laid people off. So it's a catch-22. But most people will tell you today that if you're middle income or lower income, going to dining out at fast food is becoming a luxury. And that's going to be a real issue going forward. The law firms, you can see here, law firms basically, hiring of lawyers has gone down by 35%. It's one of the slowest demands we've seen in a long time. The hit last year, 45% decline in attorneys nationally, which is pretty significant. And United Healthcare has paid out $3 billion in a cyber attack that occurred, and that was significant in terms of, again, you're hearing this every week. You hear about another major attack. And Walgreens announced that they're going to cut costs by $1 billion this year. That will include layoffs and closing more locations around the country. And Amazon, which is a major holder of real estate, has announced they want to break a lot of the leases and close down, and they want to save about $1.3 billion. And what they're doing now, they're cutting areas where there are vacancies. They want to sublet some of the space. Some areas are not going to renew leases. And in many cases, they're going to terminate things ending early. So that's the movement now by Amazon. AT&T had a major security breach, and that affected I think it was about 7.6 million current clients, and then for about 65 million historical clients, people that have moved maybe to T-Mobile or some other carrier, but they got hacked. And then unfortunately, the 99-cent stores are closing around the country, all 371 of them, which is too bad because it's a cool place to buy things at a very low cost. Now, this is something very interesting here. So foreclosures in the month around the country on properties was at 32,875. For the first quarter of this year, foreclosures were up by 95,000. And that's 3% higher than the previous quarter. So you're starting to see a lot of foreclosures taking place in different aspects of real estate. Now, the good news is the U.S. is investing money in the chip industry. They just invested $53 billion. It's a mix of subsidiaries to help move the industry forward as comparing competition around the world. As you know, that the semiconductor business primarily is really run primarily by Taiwan, and we're getting back in the game. We probably are building now somewhere around 12 to 15 factories and plants throughout the United States, all over the country, which is good. So we can have more control in our own destiny in terms of manufacturing semiconductor chips. We look at a company called BlackRock, and what they're talking about here is that they believe that the AI impact will increase productivity and worker pay. At the same time, it'll eliminate a lot of jobs, but people will make a lot more money given with this new technology. Our friends at the U.S. Postal Service again is proposing a 7.8% price increase, again, offset their deficit. And what'll be interesting, you'll probably be paying, I'm going to guess, over 70 cents a stamp sometime in the not too distant future. They're looking at the effect going into effect possibly on July 1 of this year in the summertime. Good news for Lockheed, a big defense contractor. They just won a contract for $17 billion. And what the contract really is for, it's to develop the next generation of interceptors that would guard the United States against an intercontinental ballistic missile attack. So this is a big deal, and this is the first of many big contracts that we expect to see awarded going forward. For those of you that use Roku, 576,000 accounts were hacked, and this is the second incident that occurred in the not too distant future. And then we look at electric vehicle sales plunging in Europe. What's interesting is this. All the countries, the United States, et cetera, have decided they want to move more toward the electric type of vehicle situation. Well, electric vehicle sales have plunged across Europe in March as demand dried up for the use of EUs across the country. And the fact that they want to ban petroleum and diesel products across the world is happening. So sales now have dropped for the first quarter by 11.3%, specifically in Germany. But overall, sales should pick up as we move forward. But right now, a lot of these countries have said they want to go to electric vehicles completely by the year of 2035. So that kind of takes you through where we are from a significant perspective. So what I want to do is I want to introduce Dave Coakley in our Q&A session. So Dave and I have worked together for many years. Dave is in Silicon Valley and spent his whole career in the semiconductor business. Kind of give us an insight, Dave, of what you see taking place in the marketplace up in the Bay Area as well as throughout the United States. So Dave, what are your thoughts?
Sure, thanks, Dennis. Appreciate the introduction. So I've called the Silicon Valley my home for basically the last 45 years of my career. And in those days, it was called the Silicon Valley because there was literally a wafer fab on pretty well every corner of every street. That's changed, of course. In 1990, the USA was producing about 37% of all the chips that it was consuming. Today, it produced 12% of those chips. That was never perceived as a problem. What happened there was over the years, the cost of building a fab increased. I remember when it was about $30 million could buy you a decent fab, and $100 million would buy you a Rolls-Royce fab. So that has changed, and the fabs that we're building today in the US with a capacity of, say, 20,000 wafer starts cost roughly $20 billion, $20 billion per fab. And the cost of the equipment is extraordinarily high. Now, I mentioned the share of manufacturing that has declined over time. But it's actually worse than that. If you look at the leading edge technology, sub 10 nanometers, right now there are only 3 companies in the world that can build that technology. Those companies are TSMC, Samsung, and Intel. If you look at 7 nanometers and lower technology, which truly is the bleeding edge, right now, 92% of the manufacturing capability for that product is in Taiwan. 8% is in Korea with Samsung, and there is 0% for the rest of the world. So the growth of the foundry industry really was predicated on essentially cost initially. It was getting too expensive in the Bay Area, and frankly, permitting and regulation was getting harder, so the fabs started moving out, but then they got more and more expensive. So people looked at collaborations, and that's essentially how the Taiwan industry was built. UMC was a joint collaboration between US companies. TSMC was Morris Chang, who came out of Texas Instruments, and they built that industry over there starting off with legacy technologies. So we essentially gave them the technology, provided a lot of subsidy, and they built the fab operations. So with the current geopolitical situation, we're obviously in a situation where we really seriously need to bring that back onshore. It's not a commodity technology. The good news there, as Dennis mentioned, there's a $53 billion CHIPS Act investment, which is levering, orders of magnitude higher investment. So we're seeing TSMC coming in, Samsung coming in, Intel building a lot of fabs, and that's pretty exciting. It's not going to be easy. The equipment that it takes to build this leading technology is at Star Wars level, frankly. Just reading about the latest EUV technology, I noticed that in Oregon, Intel has got its hands on a high numerical aperture scanner, which is the most leading piece of equipment in the semiconductor industry. It's about the size of a double-decker bus. It costs $350 million, just one scanner, $350 million. And the technology used there is 13.5 nanometer, which will enable us to build 2 nanometer chips. So the process side, some encouraging signs and investments, probably realistically, to get to that 20% government target, maybe 10 to 20 years will take. So it's quite a long time. We've got quite a path to go. And as Dennis mentioned, I think it's not just one thing. There's people, training, building the entire infrastructure that would support a semiconductor manufacturing industry. Meanwhile, on the design side, we're in great shape. NVIDIA, I remember that company when it was, probably second or third in the graphics chip market, and it rose to be number one, sustained its lead. And now it's over $1 trillion company. It's the most valuable semiconductor company on the planet. So we've got it right on the design side. We're leading there. And over time, we hope to get back and at least get the leading edge technology. The commodities, probably not so interesting, but the leading edge is absolutely critical for national security.
Dave, what do you see in the area?